The Mets bullpen comes back to bite them yet again, and Brandon Nimmo could be heading towards the IL. I'll talk about all the latest on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use the code, all in lowercase, LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. The New York Mets needed to sweep the Marlins this weekend. I went into this series telling you all it was a must-sweep series that's coming off the heels of the Mets losing their series against the Oakland Athletics. Going into the week last week, I said the Mets had to win 5 games. And my thought process there was the A's are a team that has been playing good baseball, but the Mets still should have beaten them in that series. And then I thought, go out and sweep the Marlins, because on paper, the past week was one of the easiest left on the schedule for the New York Mets. Now, here's the thing with all of that. I was being hyperbolic. And at the end of the day, nothing is must anything until your tragic number hits 0. And the New York Mets still have time. They still have enough leeway in their schedule to find their way to a playoff spot. They're only 2 games out. But when you get to the end of the season, if the Mets are on the outside looking in, it's the games against the A's, the Angels, the Marlins that you're going to look back on since this calendar has turned to August and say, man, those were some missed opportunities. And this game on Sunday was absolutely one of them. If you look at the things that you need to win, the Mets got the big one, Paul Blackburn, a quality start, 6 innings pitched, 1 earned run. He did his job. The lineup, they did not do enough, clearly. They only scored 2 runs. But if you look at the game as a whole, they did put themselves in a position to win. Sometimes you got to win in different ways. And if a team is actually going to be a playoff caliber team, if a team's actually going to make it into October, you have to be able to win the lopsided games where, of course, you pile on a ton of runs, the games where it's back and forth, slugfest, and you got to win some of those really close baseball games. And that's just the way things shake out sometimes, because if you look at the actual results in a baseball game, you can't just put it out there and say, oh, well, the Mets have a much better lineup than the Marlins. They should win every single time. That's not how it works. The other team's trying too. And sometimes the ball just doesn't bounce your way. And I think that's what happened for the most part in this game on Sunday. You look at the first inning. Francisco Lindor scorches one. Ball gets caught. All right. Mark Vientos gets a base hit. Brandon Nimmo draws a walk. Then Pete Alonso hits one to the warning track, where the center fielder catches it and runs into the wall. Mark Vientos was sent from second base to try to score on a sacrifice fly where he was going to take 2 bases, and Vientos does not have a lot of speed. Now, you ended up seeing the rare, 8-9-2 double play. Center fielder catches it, crashes into the wall, flips it to the right fielder, Jesus Sanchez, who throws it in relay, comes to the plate, and Mark Vientos just barely in a bang-bang play gets tagged out. Game of inches, right? That relay throw goes a little bit offline. The throw home goes a little bit further offline. Any of these things, Vientos scores, the Mets are up in that situation. They got a lead, and who knows if they can add on to it and maybe put the starting pitcher into a really tough spot to open the game. Instead, it's a double play and a ball hits the warning track. Now you look at the 4 batters. All of them had an outcome that you like as far as if you're a hitter, the result you got. Lindor hit the ball hard. Pete Alonso hit the ball hard. Vientos got a hit. Nimmo drew a walk, but it results in nothing. And that's just how baseball can go sometimes. Third inning, the Marlins get on the board on a fly ball where Tyrone Taylor tries to dive to catch it, isn't able to come up with it, and it ends up being a triple. Now, if Taylor catches that ball, And the center fielder for the Marlins was it Derek Hill. If he doesn't catch Lindor or Alonso's fly ball, completely different game. But that's baseball. And so while you can get mad at the Mets lineup for only scoring 2 runs, and rightfully so to some extent, I honestly look at this game and say, you know what? 2-1 going into the 7th inning. The Mets had a lead. You have to be able to win that game. Even without scoring any more runs. Get those last 9 outs and win a 2-1 game. Get that series sweep. So ultimately here, the biggest problem that came out of this game, or the biggest problem that was shown through this game, is the fact that the Mets still don't have an answer in that bullpen. That's still the problem here. Because Paul Blackburn exits. Brandon Nimmo in the bottom of the 6th inning hits a solo home run to give the Mets a 2-1 lead. And here comes Huascar Brazoban to pitch in the 7th inning, and he can't get the job done. The thing is, though, it's also just baseball. Because Brazoban, I don't think he pitched poorly at all. He just got unlucky. The Marlins just dinged him for soft contact, and everything fell for them. You had 4 balls that were hit at 80 miles per hour or less. 3 of them resulted in hits. Only 1 of them resulted in an out. If things go the Mets' way in that inning, all right. You end up getting through that 7th easy. Maybe Reed Garrett gets a clean inning in the 8th, not having gotten the final out of the 7th, and then sat in the dugout for a while to come back out for the 8th. Maybe he doesn't have the blow up that he does in the 8th, and the Mets win the game. But that's just not how things end up shaking out. Instead, you need Garrett to get the final out of the 7th. Brandon Nimmo has to come charging in to catch a fly ball, dives right on his right shoulder. Who knows? We'll talk about that more in the next segment, what his injury status is going to be beyond this game. But he gets pulled after trying to hit in the bottom of the 7th inning. He strikes out. And after his first swing, there was an injury delay where they went check him out because Nimmo was really shaken up. He goes back into the box again, strikes out. All of that was time that Garrett is sitting in the dugout. Now Garrett goes back out for the 8th inning. He walks 3. That was the inning that really cost the Mets. Reed Garrett walking 3 batters in a tie game. You just can't have that. Phil Maton comes on to try to clean up his mess. He gives up a base hit that ultimately ends up being the game-winning hit for the Marlins as the Mets just can't score another run. Now, they had their chances, particularly in the 9th inning, as you had Jose Iglesias beat out an infield single. Tyrone Taylor gets a hit after that. So your first 2 runners are on with nobody out. Going up against the Marlins, they still had the chance to pull that game out. Now, there was a lot of debate about the decision to have Jeff McNeil square for a sacrifice bunt in that spot with runners at 1st and 2nd. Part of me at the time was frustrated by that decision. My gut reaction was let him swing the bat. Because Jeff McNeil's swinging a hot bat and he gets a base hit, tie ball game, he gets a double, you win it. And I feel really good about Jeff McNeil swinging the bat right now. Instead, you sort of take the bat out of his hands. He can't get the bunt down, and then he strikes out swinging. Now, the alternative point to that, though, is if Jeff McNeil does get the sac bunt down, you have runners at 2nd and 3rd. When Francisco Lindor hits a fly ball to the warning track like he did, you at least would have lived to fight another day, got to that 2 extra innings. And as the home team, probably the right call. So I'm not going to crush Mendoza for having Jeff McNeil square to bunt there. It made some sense considering the fact that Francisco Lindor was standing on deck and you were setting yourself up for a sac fly to tie or a base hit from Lindor to win. You're putting the game in the hands of your best player and maybe not your absolute hottest hitter in Jeff McNeil, but honestly, I mean, everybody would have rather had Lindor up in a big spot. So, you know, you're taking the double play out of Jeff McNeil's hands, which is still a possibility. There's a lot that comes with the decision to bunt there. I don't think that's why the Mets lose that game. I think the Mets lost that game because of their bullpen and because they just had some crummy luck. And you don't want to hear that. You don't want to make that excuse for the Mets at this time. But this was not one of those games where I ultimately look back and say, man, the Mets played horrible. They looked horrible in the box. They played sloppy defense. Their starter got knocked around. No, you got a good start. your team at least got you into a position to win a game late for your bullpen. It's the bullpen that's the bigger issue, and that's what we're going to talk about next, as well as Brandon Nimmo's situation, because Nimmo is going to get an MRI on that shoulder, and there's a chance that he misses some time here. How would the Mets deal with that loss? I'll go through those things in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You watch the winnings roll in. Get in on daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. So you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week. From lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You also can take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. Now, these giveaways are exclusive to the insiders, and I just got some signed photos in the mail, so I'll be running one this week. If you want to take part in that giveaway, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider by finding the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Let's talk about Brandon Nimmo. A really unfortunate situation for Nimmo here, as he has gotten so much better at protecting his body. And he's talked about this a lot, learning when to sell out and when not to. That's something that Jay Bruce taught him early in his career, and it took him a while to figure it out. But he has learned which plays he needs to make the extra effort and put his body on the line for, and which plays he should just leave and let that, softly hit ball fall for a base hit and live to fight another day or another at bat, another inning. That was a play that he had to make. The game situation dictated it. Tie baseball game, if it falls, you're losing, make the catch, and he does. A great play and a great game for Nimmo. He had what looked like for a brief moment what could have been the game-winning home run, and it all very quickly just evaporates for him. Now we don't know what's going to happen. Best case scenario, he's day-to-day. Worst case scenario, he could be out for the season. Somewhere in the middle, it might be a 10-day IL stint. We'll see exactly what the MRI says. But what I will say about this injury when it comes to the Mets getting by without Brandon Nimmo, this is one of the players the Mets could afford to lose. And it's not to say, they're better off without Brandon Nimmo. Definitely not. But Starlin Marte just came off the IL. You have Jeff McNeil that can slide into left or right at any time. You still have Harrison Bader, and you traded for Jesse Winker. So simplest lineup construction when you have a righty on the mound. Jesse Winker slides into left, Bader's in center. You either play Tyrone Taylor or Starlin Marte in right. You also could put Jeff McNeil out there in either corner and be fine. So you have a ton of options right now to start in the outfield. There was going to be a little bit of a roster jam here. It was going to be kind of hard to get all these guys playing time. Carlos Mendoza at one point, I believe he said, these things sort of figure themselves out. You hate for this to be the way that it does sort of solve itself, but that could be the position the Mets are in right now. They can get by without Brandon Nimmo. He is hitting over his last 30 games 165. Now, he was putting together a really strong series, 2 home runs, seemed like he was starting to turn a corner, so this comes at the worst time for him. But even with this great series, over his last 7 games, he was batting 160. So that just shows you how bad he was in the 4 games prior to this series, that his numbers were still that low over the past week. Without Brandon Nimmo, the Mets can get by. I am more concerned about the bullpen than I am about Brandon Nimmo here, and we'll talk about the bullpen in a second. As far as the roster move, if Brandon Nimmo hits the IL on Monday, expect Brett Baty to come up. That'd be my prediction. Now, you could say, why not TJ Stewart? He can come back. He gives you another outfielder, left-handed bat. That is an option. But I think if the Mets have to make a roster move, they'll call up Brett Baty, because Brett Baty is finally swinging a hot bat, and he has worked really hard at second base. Now he seems to be comfortable there. David Stern said as much when he spoke to the media over the weekend. So I envision the roster move if Nimmo does hit the IL. Beatty comes up. He went 3 for 5 on Sunday in Syracuse, hit another home run, his 5th over his last 8 games. So I think Beatty comes up, gets some time at second base, sort of platooning a little bit there with Jose Iglesias, but Iglesias would still start against some righties. It's not going to be a straight platoon. Beatty can always, give Vientos a breather at times at third base. He also would be a defensive replacement at third base, potentially late in games. They still could go with Iglesias at third and Jeff McNeil at second, but this gives you more freedom to play McNeil in the outfield. I think that's important because Starling Marte is not going to be an everyday player. So you have Jeff McNeil who can start in right field when you need to give Marte a blow. When you have a lefty on the mound, as there will be on Monday, I'd imagine you're going to have Marte in the outfield, potentially with both Tyrone Taylor and Harrison Bader. So the Mets will still have a roster that is really deep. I'm not worried about this team offensively or even defensively without Brandon Nimmo. They're going to be fine. Yes, they're a better team with Brandon Nimmo, no doubt about it, but I am far more concerned about this bullpen because right now, outside of Edwin Diaz and probably Jose Budo, who do you really trust in that bullpen? Phil Maton is probably as close as you're going to get to a lockdown reliever, but he's certainly not locked down. Phil Maton doesn't come in the game and the heart rate just slows for you as a fan. No, there's not a single pitcher in that bullpen outside of Budo and again Diaz that you feel good about. And at times, you don't always feel good about it when Diaz. And Jose Budo has been so good that he's almost due to give up some runs as he did a couple appearances ago because guys don't just pitch to 0 ERAs in the bullpen. It's eventually going to happen. So you look at where the Mets are at. One of the biggest injury news items from the weekend is Daniel Nunez is going to start a rehab assignment on Tuesday. He's going to throw an inning in Syracuse, and he could be back pretty soon. So that is huge because Nunez, prior to the injury, was arguably your best reliever so far this season. So if Nunez looks like himself again, comes back, and could be the 8th inning guy to Edwin Diaz, that does shore things up a lot. The question would be, who gets taken out of that bullpen for Nunez? You got Diaz, you got Nunez, you got Maton, you got Budo. Those guys are there. Ryan Stanek and Adam Ottavino are certainly on the hot seat. Neither of them has options, though. And knowing how the Mets have operated this year, preserving those guys might still be prioritized when you have other pitchers in that bullpen who aren't necessarily thriving, who have options. Danny Young is your one lefty. He's been pitching pretty well. I think Young would probably stay. Comes down to then Huascar Brazoban and Reed Garrett. Now, Brazoban has not had a great start with the Mets, but if you look at the performance of those two guys in this game today, who was worse? The guy that just got destroyed by soft contact, death by a million small cuts, or the guy who in a tie game walked 3 batters? Reed Garrett was not pitching well prior to getting hurt. Now he's come back. You need to see him get his footing, and that's why I don't think that he would ultimately be optioned right now just for Daniel Nunez. I think they'd like to see a couple more appearances here, and that's where I'd wonder if they just decide to cut their losses on Ryan Stanek. Say, all right, failed trade, whatever. We're going to move on. Maybe that's the route that they go, and then they keep Adam Ottavino because he is a leader in that clubhouse for sure. And they keep Brazoban, they keep Garrett, they keep Young, and they just slide Nunez into the bullpen for now. I think that is maybe the more likely route to go, but I also would not be surprised at all if it is Brazoban that gets sent down or if it's Garrett. They could just say, listen, Reed Garrett just came back. He had some rough outings. We want to see him, get back into, better shape. He's going to come back up in September, and they will have the opportunity when the roster expands to add another arm. So either Brazoban or Garrett could go down, work a little bit, come back. That's why I could see the Mets going that route. And as much as you want to be excited about the idea of some flashy September call-up when it comes to Brandon Sproat coming up and being that guy, and I've talked about that a ton, or Christian Scott being healthy and being a 6th starter in this rotation or pitching out of the bullpen, all those big flashy names, the the young guns, I honestly think it's just going to be a ninth reliever. And it's one of these guys that might get optioned for Nunez if that's the route that they go. So we'll see exactly what the decision will be once the time comes on Nunez. He's still got to go through his rehab assignment. So that might be a week in Syracuse before the Mets are going to call on him. When they make that decision, we'll discuss it at length. And we'll see what happens with Brandon Nimmo. The hope would be that Nimmo is fine. But if he does go down, my prediction is Brett Beatty comes up. Other options would be DJ Stewart. On the outside would be Luis Angel Acuna, but I doubt that. It's probably Stewart or Beatty is ultimately where I think the Mets would go here. Yeah, they could add Luke Ritter to the 40, bring him up. I just don't think they'll do that. They just DFA'd Ben Gamel to make room for Starling Marte to come back. It's funny how those things work. You would probably like Gamel to come up more than anyone, but Gamel's now designated for assignment. So we'll see what happens with Nimmo, and I'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. One last little injury note. Jet Williams is starting a rehab assignment. The Mets' top prospect is going to begin his rehab in Port St. Lucie. Will likely be back up to Double-A very soon, and he'll probably get about a full month here, maybe a little bit more than that, of his season to get ready for the Arizona Fall League, and that he's going to be the Mets' brightest star in that Arizona Fall League, trying to get himself ready and trying to shine to potentially be in position to compete for a job in camp next year. More likely, he's going to need some seasoning in the minor leagues still, but really good that he's back on the field, and you're going to get to see some of him down the stretch here. The Mets are about to play a team that has a lot of young studs, similar to Jet Williams, maybe even on a higher scale. We're going to talk about the Baltimore Orioles in this upcoming series in just a minute. First, though, another word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you here. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with YouTube TV's base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. Again, this is for all FanDuel customers, not just new customers. All FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports by checking out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, when we were talking about this homestand a week ago, the series coming up was the one everyone was worried about. The Oakland Athletics, bad team, right? The Miami Marlins, horrible team. The Baltimore Orioles, one of the best teams in baseball. Here's what I'll say about the Orioles, though. They really padded their record early when they were 53-31 through the month of June. Since July, they've been a 500 team. They're 20-21. So to say that they are unbeatable, that's not really fair. This month, they're 8-8. They just split a 4-game series against the Boston Red Sox. So the New York Mets can absolutely beat the Orioles this week, but they got to be on top of their game. This Orioles lineup is scary good, can be great at times. They got a lot of young talent. Gunnar Henderson has been their best player this year. He's swinging a hot bat lately. Jackson Holliday has come up, and his second stint in the big leagues has been far better than his first for the former top prospect in the game. He earned that for a reason. This guy can be elite, and we're starting to see that. So he's dangerous. Adley Rutschman is always a consistent force, swinging a good bat lately. Anthony Santander has 4 home runs over the last couple of weeks. Hasn't been doing much beyond that, but he's still producing. You have a ton of guys from Ryan Mountcastle, Ryan O'Hearn, and a platoon at first base. Eloy Jimenez has been very good since coming over in a trade, a very surprising trade, but change of scenery has done him wonders. This is a good lineup that can be great and could put up runs in a hurry. So they are to be feared. On the pitching side, there are some holes the Mets can exploit. Okay, the bullpen for the Orioles has not been good this year. They ranked 22nd in baseball in ERA at 4.16. And since July, during this stretch where the Orioles have not been great, their bullpen has a 5.36 ERA That's 6th worst in the game. So the Mets can get into that bullpen early in games. They got a shot here, and they're going to face a very familiar starting pitcher in game 1 of this series, and that's Trevor Rogers. If you know the name, he was a pitcher for the Marlins for a long time, runner-up in the Rookie of the Year race back in 2021, a pitcher the Mets actually showed some interest in at this deadline. Instead, he goes to the Baltimore Orioles. In 3 starts since coming over, Trevor Rogers has a 7.53 ERA. He is yet to record an out in the 6th inning. So if the Mets can knock him out of the game early, the last time they faced Trevor Rogers this year, they knocked him out in the 5th inning. Getting to that bullpen, they got a shot, and David Peterson's on the mound. And David Peterson lately has been the pitcher that's gotten the most run support. So this game 1 is huge for the Mets. You got to go out, find a way to win this game. The fact that there's a lefty on the mound, that does ease some pressure on Brandon Nimmo anyway. Would have been a good rest day for him. So Brandon Nimmo, if he is still on the roster and doesn't go on the IL, he's probably on the bench. Like I mentioned in the last segment, you'll probably put Tyrone Taylor, Harrison Bader, Starling Marte in your outfield. If not, Jeff McNeil sliding into one of those spots. And hopefully the Mets can put up a lot of runs on Trevor Rogers and that bullpen and get this series off to a good start. The other good news about this series, you're not going to see Corbin Burns. And actually, is Grayson Rodriguez hurt? I was going to say you're not going to see Grayson Rodriguez, but something tells me that he might have hit the IL recently anyway. Check real quick. Okay, so yeah, he's throwing for the first time since injury, but he's hurt. So that's another reason why we're not going to see him. But not facing Corbin Burns, that's huge for the Mets. Instead, it's going to be, as I already mentioned, Trevor Rogers. Game 2 will be Dean Kramer, who's got a 4.48 ERA in the season, versus Jose Quintana with his 4.26 ERA. And then Zach Eflin versus Sean Manaea. Eflin is a good starting pitcher. You remember him from his days with the Phillies. More recently with the Rays, then traded to the Orioles at the deadline. He's had some good starts since coming over. That's not going to be an easy rubber match game, but at least you have Sean Manaea on the mound, assuming it is a rubber match. So the onus is on the Mets to win game 1, put themselves in a good position here, and really just do the best they can this week. It's going to be a very, very tough set of games. 3 against the Orioles. Without an off day, hit the road, play 4 in San Diego. So this is going to be a week where the Mets have their work cut out for them. But you know what? Maybe playing the easy games doesn't go for the Mets. Maybe it's the harder schedule that they thrive in. We all hope so, as they are still just 2 games back in this wildcard race. But the Braves are going through an upcoming stretch that's going to be a little more difficult than their September schedule. September, they sort of have an easy slate. They have 4 games against the Dodgers, and then their final 6 games are Mets for 3, Royals for 3. But other than that, it's all sub-500 teams. So for the Braves, this upcoming set of games is going to be their toughest. They have 7 of their next 13 against the Phillies. They have an off day on Monday, then a 3-game set against Philly. They play the Nationals, the Twins, and then a 4-gamer in Philadelphia to close out the 13-game stretch. So the next 2 weeks here, very important for the New York Mets to stack some victories. It's going to be Orioles. Then you're going to have the Padres, Diamondbacks, and then I believe the White Sox to close this month. The Mets have to finish August strong so they can put themselves in a good position heading to September. And despite Brandon Nimmo's injury, the bullpen woes, all of it, I still think this team has a good run left in them. We just got to watch it unfold, and I will be with you every step of the way, every day here with Locked On Mets. I appreciate all of you who tuned into the show today. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, participate in our signed photo giveaways this week, make sure you find a link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel covering everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local experts from each team, league-wide experts from each league. You find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.